All right, so it's 2 o'clock. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our Self Leveling Underlayment webinar. My name is Gilles Bignolas. I am a technical services representative here with LATICRETE International, and I would like to take the time to thank all of you for joining us this afternoon. Actually, a beautiful fall afternoon here in Connecticut. Today with me is my good buddy Marcel Schoen. Marcel is a member of our technical services team. He has about 15 years of experience, and he's one of our utmost experts when it comes to anything related to self-leveling underlayment. So I'm pretty stoked to have him here to present his content over to us. Marcel, how are you doing, sir?
Very good. How about you?
Not too bad, not too
Good,
shabby.
good.
So today the format is going to be pretty much the same as our last webinar. If you attended it, we're going to start with a PowerPoint presentation. Then we're going to have a quick intermission to focus on some points and have a little discussion. And then we'll finish that up with a product demonstration video. So we have about 53 to 55 minutes of content to present to you guys. So we're not going to have a ton of time for discussion or answering questions. However, if you use the chat feature, we will be looking at that throughout the entire hour. So we'll try to answer questions as they come. If we, for some reason, we don't get to you, be assured we will reach out by email later on this afternoon. So without further ado, I'm going to cue this up and get it going. Marcel, you ready?
Absolutely.
All right.
Hello, and thank you for joining the Self-Leveling Underlayments and Toppings portion of our presentation. Just want to thank you for joining this segment. Let's go over a quick overview of what we're going to cover in this segment. We're going to get into common problems with concrete slabs. We'll certainly get into what is a self-leveling underlayment. We'll go over proper prep, estimation, install, tools, and techniques. We'll touch on some of the lean construction benefits this technology or this product brings to a job. And after this PowerPoint presentation is over, we're going to get into some hands-on techniques, tooling, things to look for. And then as always, you'll be able to have some questions and answers at the end. I just want to quickly go back over some of the things that we touched on at length in the moisture mitigation portion of our PTK presentations, starting off with what is concrete. As we discussed before, it's going to be a mixture of cement, admixes, coarse aggregates, water, even air, and fine aggregates. So again, you can see here that you have some natural resources, maybe some man-made chemicals in the form of admixtures, air, and water, which is going to help ease the placement of that concrete, get it onto the job site, pour out that slab, get it into place so it can start curing, building its strength, and then obviously be used for the service of the building. Again, as we touched on in the moisture mitigation presentation, a lot of this water is going to be added to the mix for ease of placement. But as you can see here in the Abrams law, that extra water, that water of convenience, a vehicle to create problems in the pour as well, or in the concrete slab. In its most basic form, Abrams' law is going to state for a given amount of cement, as the water content is increased, the strength of the mortar of the concrete mix decreases. Once you're over the optimal point of water, and then you put extra in for water of convenience or ease of placement, that's when the potential problems come in. As you can see here, ideally, the optimum amount of water for strength is about 1/4 pound per pound of cement. So that leads us to what do some of these problems look like. You may see crazing on a job. As you can see to the right here, are plastic shrinkage cracks. Both unsightly, and as you can imagine, both not ideal for a finished floor covering to go over this. Crusting is a fairly common problem seen out in the field. This usually occurs from the drying out of the surface of the concrete or mortar before the set occurs. Scaling is a common concrete problem, which in effect is the deterioration of the surface of the concrete. Dusting, you probably have all seen this before, which is the development of a powdered material at the surface of hardened concrete. A lot of times these powders are essentially going to be chemical compounds in the form of calcium carbonate or calcium hydroxide, leaving that dust on the surface. So again, something that's not going to be very bondable and ideal for a finished floor covering to go over it. Delamination is certainly a common problem with concrete, which is the separation of the surface from the mass of the concrete. A lot of times this is caused by floating bleed water into the surface. Another common technique that leads to this is hard troweling of an air-entrained concrete. Again, so you can see that top skin of the concrete is actually coming off where you can see back down to the larger aggregate as part of that concrete mix. Which leads us right into the substrate condition, right? Again, as we went over at length in the moisture mitigation presentation, all substrates to receive a flooring must be clean, sound, and solid. So we're talking structurally sound, obviously clean, dry, properly prepared, which we'll touch on again, no bond breakers. You're going to want that within a certain temperature range, which is usually going to be easy to find on the product installation instructions, flat and or level. And as you clearly see here, not all concrete surface problems are caused by the concrete mix, pour, or cure itself. Certainly in renovation projects especially, these problems are also commonly going to occur in the demo phase. A simple question to answer here, is this slab sound? I would think that the answer is a pretty solid no. So again, you're going to have to get all these contaminants off, nice, clean, flat, level, and then you'll be ready to receive a floor covering over it. Another common problem in concrete isn't even seen on the surface. It comes in the form of curling. In a nutshell, curling can be considered the distortion of an originally essentially flat member into a curved shape. I usually explain this to people, think of it like a sponge. If you leave a sponge soaking wet on your sink, it's going to lay flat when it's wet. As it dries, it's going to start to curl on the edges. That's the same idea that's happening here in the concrete slab. Here's just a great snapshot of how self-leveling underlayment can actually help a slab that is curled or maybe deflected over time and making that slab flat enough to receive flooring again. Many of you in the industry are likely aware that the great divide actually happens between the Division 3 portion of the specs and a Division 9 portion of the specs. We're not going to get into these aspects too much, but essentially Division 3 contractors are going to be held to an FF. Okay, so an FF of 35, for example, might be something that they're going to be held to. In Division 9, they're going to be going by the industry standards or a lot of times the flooring manufacturer's installation instructions, which may say something like an 8 and 10. Again, not to touch on this too much, I don't want to get you confused here. The main gap between these two divisions is the fact that the FF is usually taken sometimes within 24 hours, on the long end sometimes 72 hours after that slab is poured. So as you could see in previous slides, that curling and other potential problems that may occur with the slab have not even had the chance to surface yet. Fast forward 6 months from now when it gets to Division 9, which is going to be the finishes on the job, they show up and now they're held to a standard which is long gone from when the time that slab was poured. So again, not trying to give you a science lesson here, but I just want to make you aware of the problems that can occur in concrete slabs. So you're not only aware of them, you're able to look out for them, and you know where, when, and how they might arise. How do we fix this? That's what we're going to get into now. And obviously is the main focus of this presentation, self-leveling underlayments. Before these came about, the industry standard way, any floor repair, leveling, anything like that that had to be done was going to be done through a mortar bed method, which at the very beginning was just basically a sand and cement mix. You're going to mix it up the consistency that you want. You're going to move that out and keep it flat as you go. As you can see here, a lot of material, a lot of handwork, a lot of prep involved. As you can imagine, a lot of time and money. But after great thought and years of doing this labor, someone had the bright idea, came up with the innovation of self-leveling underlayments, which allows you to mix a cement easily in a pail, pour it onto a floor, stand up as you move it in place, and create a smooth floor, saving a lot of time, weight, not only on the installers bringing the material into the building, but also on the building structure itself. As you can start to see here, the benefits of a self-leveler over the traditional mortar bed method greatly outweigh each other. Now keep in mind, I'm not trying to discredit mortar beds in any way. Those are certainly still used for pitching floors to drains, showers, stuff like that. There is a need for it, but you can imagine on the right types of jobs where you're just looking to smooth out a floor before putting a finished flooring over it, self-leveling is certainly going to be a way to go. Just like any other construction project, it's extremely important to come up with your checklist. Make sure you know what you're getting into before you actually start the project, so you don't have any surprises later on down the road, any surprise costs later on down the road, loss of time, you name it. I always say failing to plan is planning to fail. That is certainly true when it comes to self-leveling. So always priority number one when doing one of these jobs, you're going to want to assess the substrate for contaminants first, keeping in mind that you're only as good as what you go over. Like any construction project, you're going to want to try to conduct the most accurate preliminary measurements as possible to estimate materials, time, ensure proper placement, ensure you have the right size crews. You're going to want to mechanically prep and address the substrate issues that you do find. You're certainly going to want to prime the substrate, and then obviously you're going to have to place the desired material. And I'll get into some of the stuff that you worry about before you do that as well. Long story short, the first thing you're always going to want to look for before doing a self-leveling project is the substrate. Again, making sure it's clean, sound, and solid. So they must be free of any dirt or dust, adhesive residue, oil or grease, wax, standing water, coatings or paint, depending on the surface, curing compounds, and sealers. So you can see there even some items that are invisible. All right, so the slab may look great, might even have a little profile to it, but if it's got a curing compound or a sealer on it, that will also be a bond breaker for the self-leveling underlayment, and it's going to have to go. As you can clearly see, you're going to need to know the substrate you're going over before you could really get to any true estimate. So if it's concrete, is it high suction concrete, non-suction, new concrete? If it's wood as a subfloor, make sure you know what you have to do to go over that. If it's an existing floor, again, make sure that it's well bonded. Getting back to the point that you're only as good as what you go over, right? So if that floor below the self-leveling is not well bonded, neither will your self-leveling underlayment pour. And then the big one to point out here again is the invisible contaminants. You need to know how to look for those. Everything may look great. You walk on it, you walk away, you think you're good to go. What you don't know is that there's curing compounds or sealers or form releases on the surface of that concrete, not allowing the next product going over it to bond successfully. So how do you look for something like that when you get into a concrete slab that looks perfect? All right. Like I said before, you're going to check to see if that concrete is high suction, normal suction, or non-suction. What you're going to do here is you're going to take a little dab of water. You're going to drop it onto that slab. You'd basically fleck it down there. If it completely absorbs into the surface within 15 seconds, you know you have a high suction substrate. What you're really looking for before you pour a self-leveler over a concrete slab is the non-suction. All right. If that water beads up on top and doesn't absorb within about 30 seconds, you can guarantee that there's something there that's invisible that will definitely be a bond breaker for the self-leveling underlayment. So at that point, you're going to tell the super, hey, look, here's some proof that this is non-suction. There's something going on here. It's got to be removed. So you can start talking that talk sooner than later. So if you get asked to come in and look at a self-leveling job, I say, as I mentioned many times in the moisture mitigation presentation, get in there sooner than later, start doing these things ahead of time so you could start telling the story now before the budget on the job is gone and there's no money in there to get you paid to actually do extra prep before you put your flooring or your self-leveling down. So you're going to have to remove these contaminants. Just to reiterate, never going to use chemicals to do this, right? No acids, any acid etching, nothing like that to remove contaminants. What it could do is it could change the pH of the composition of the concrete. It could create a weak bondable layer. It does not increase surface area, and it could certainly adversely react with subsequent layers. So again, you may use that acid, get all the extra glue or whatever residue is off of the floor. Everything looks great, but when you try to put a primer over it, it's not going to react well with that acid, which in hand will make it a bond breaker. Always read the label of the self-leveling underlayment that you're putting down, but a pretty common industry standard and agreed upon prep method in the industry is to get that concrete to a CSP of 3, a concrete surface profile of 3, and that's going to give you a great surface for a self-leveling underlayment to bond to. And as you'll see in this slide here, in the top row, all the way to the right, CSP of 3 is going to look like an orange peel finish is what I usually tell people. If that floor looks like an orange peel, you're pretty good to go. Now, naturally, you could go with the CSP of 8, but you could imagine you're going to use a lot more material on that project. It's also going to make that primer a lot harder to get down evenly, which you don't want. You don't want puddles or anything like that. CSP of 3, again, is a great profile to shoot for and will be the most friendly profile you're going to get for a self-leveling underlayment. So how do we get to a CSP at 3? The preferred method and the easiest way to get to a consistent CSP at 3 is going to be your shot blasting or bead blasting. Certainly many use dustless grinding equipment, scarification or scravellers, and sand blasting, but again, that shot blasting, bead blasting is going to be the way to go. It's going to give you the most consistent results, which you'll be able to see in a minute. Here's some picture examples of the equipment I was just talking about. You can see here we have a little edge grinder in the top left, little hand angle grinder in the bottom left. These are going to be good for if you're doing maybe 1-2 room jobs, you have one guy in the job, or you don't have the big equipment, but you got a self-level. Again, these will open the pores, get the contaminant off, much like the giant diamond grinder to the right is going to do. A problem here, though, worth pointing out is when using grinding equipment, if the blades or the diamonds that you have on that equipment are not in good condition or maybe old, you may be actually be doing work that's counterproductive to getting that floor ready for a self-leveling underlayment primer or something like that. Reason being, you're going to be burning that surface off, right? So sure, you're going to be getting the adhesive off. It looks nice and clean to you, but because the wear and tear on that diamond has already occurred, you're closing that surface back off again to not receiving a primer or a successive coating, almost like to the end of having a non-suction concrete surface. So again, that CSP of 3 from a bead blaster, which you see in the middle, is going to be nice, consistent pores, all right? Clean that surface off and make it ready to receive the next layer. You can see right there in the middle, it almost looks like he's mowing the lawn. So off to the right with the diamond grinder, it is getting it off, but you could see in that picture how it could potentially be closing that off or even encapsulating some of that contaminant under the layer that's ground off. Whereas the bead blaster, it's going to get it off consistently, row by row, by actually pulverizing that surface and removing all contaminants without any chance of closing that surface off. Here's another great example. You see to the left, this slab is certainly contaminated. And you can see the effects of what a bead blaster or sand blaster is going to do. Okay, so now we got the floor clean. We got our CSP of 3. Are we ready to pour? Let's think. We have no contaminants. We have the right surface temperature. We're going to have the right ambient temperature in the room, which is always important. No debris. And we got our proper CSP. Should be good to go, right? No. The only reason I do that is I just want to make it clear that you're always going to want to prime the substrate after you prepare it before putting a self-leveler over it. Whether you're using a moisture mitigation product as your primer, or if you're going direct to the concrete, you're still going to need to prime that surface before you go over it. This is going to help retain moisture in the self-leveling product, so that moisture isn't sucked out of it once you pour it over, which can create bond issues or even surface appearance issues. It certainly promotes substrate awareness. For example, if you're brooming out a primer, rolling out a primer, and you see big areas of dust, or you see maybe that it's not soaking in there, that's going to certainly make you aware that there might still be a problem and something more you have to do. But more than anything, it's going to ensure a great bond, which is what we're looking for. Here's some great examples of why prime. You can see to the left here, we have actually a plastic sheet that we poured some self-leveler over. This is the number one best example. Not only to show you what will happen to a self-leveler if you don't prime, but this is almost showing you the same idea what I was talking about earlier with the concrete slab, how it's going to curl, right? As these types of products want to dry, that water's trying to evaporate, reach equilibrium, which in hand is going to make that product want to curl. If you don't have it primed, as you can see on the top of the plastic sheet here, it is going to curl. So this is a great example of what that's going to look like. That's an extreme example though, right? Down below and up to the top right here is going to be what's more commonly seen on a job site. So you're going to get large cracks, you may get hollow spots under the pour, items that the super building odor, floor covering guy, if it wasn't done by the same contractor, do not want to walk in and see before they lay their finished floor over this. So again, always important to prime. Take the extra step earlier, avoid these problems later. And as you can see in the picture in the bottom here, once this does start curling, say the GC walks on the job the next day before you get there, they see these big cracks, they start tapping at the floor, it's hollow, they get under it, it's probably going to start coming up in big chunks like you see here. Something you definitely do not want to happen before you show up to the job the next day. So again, do the work up front to save yourself a ton of time and money in the back end. All right, so here is the primer that we're going to recommend. Again, this is going to be going over a concrete slab direct, no moisture mitigation needed. We already did all that work and everything that we went over in that presentation. We know that we're good to go with pouring a self-leveler over the slab that's there. We prepare it to the CSP of 3, and now we're ready to prime. That's where you're going to step in with our NXT primer. This is our water-based primer for all NXT applications. Very simple to apply. It's going to be a broom, roller, or spray applied. When you put it down, it's going to appear milky white. When dry, it's going to be clear. Most cases, again, if that building is in proper condition, you're looking at about a 3 to 5 hour dry time. If it dries within 30 minutes, these are important things to note here. If it dries within 30 minutes, or if it's left unused for more than 24 hours, you're going to have to reapply the primer. So you might be thinking, how could it dry in 30 minutes? Probably hasn't dried in 30 minutes. More than likely, that slab was a lot more high suction than we thought it was based on our water drop test. We kind of miscalculated that, and all it's doing is really sucking the water out of the dilution that you made right back into the slab, which in hand is making it be dry on the surface. So at that point, you know that you need another layer to help the primer do what it's supposed to do for the self-leveling going over it. So again, if you see that thing dry up in about 30 minutes, there's something more going on there than it's just a great day and your job's able to move. Take the step, do another layer of primer, and you're good to go. If it goes longer than 24 hours, you also have to reprime. This is because the primer is actually going to close itself off after a 24-hour period and then make it not a suitable substrate for the self-leveling going over it. I stress upon this document a lot in the moisture mitigation presentation, but I just want to again refer you to our TDS 230N, which is our LATICRETE NXT Substrate Preparation and Primer Guide, which, like I mentioned before, is your holy grail to doing any self-leveling pour with the LATICRETE product. It's going to tell you proper prep, tooling, things you need to look for. This chart is in there. It's going to talk about the high suction concrete, how to do that stuff. So again, basically have that on hand or go over it anytime you're going to do a pour to make sure you're up to date and current on applying LATICRETE self-leveling underlayments. Okay, we have our primer to water ratio properly diluted based on the substrate that we're going over. Now you're going to apply the primer to the floor. Important to point out, you can see here is a good example. Thinner is the winner, I always tell people when it comes down to priming, okay? You don't want any puddles or anything that could form a thick gummy surface, all right? Once it doesn't transfer to your thumb, you're good to go. Again, usually about 3 to 5 hours, but if in 5 hours or 6 hours, if it's more than just tacky and it's actually still transferring to your thumb, it's not dry, so wait the extra time and then pour once dry. But you can see here, this is a little thick in some areas. What that's going to do, it's going to A, take longer to dry, but B, when it does dry, it's going to leave a tacky surface, which is not good to bond to. You do not want a gummy surface. As you can imagine, that's naturally going to be a potential bond breaker, especially considering the way that that self-leveling dries and wants the tensile pull off of that surface. Another extremely important thing to point out before doing any pour, you're going to make sure you have your pour stops in place. This is always important if you're doing a self-leveler on a second story, anywhere above ground basically, or even on ground. You don't want that pouring through walls or down into plumbing or anything like that. So always make sure you have your pour stops in place, which is essentially a barricade around anything where this self-lever can actually go. Trust me, a lot of companies have learned this the hard way. You do not want to be one of them. So this is important when scheduling a project, giving the owner the super realistic timeline of what's going to happen, how it's going to happen. Always remember the pour stops. You're certainly going to want to make sure that you measure the substrate so you can estimate the material and also set your heights. Without doing this step, you're effectively guessing, and that is not something you want to do on a self-leveling pour. You may be able to get away with it in one room where you could drop a straight edge or something like that, but if you're doing any significantly sized project, you're always going to make sure you pin the floor. We do recommend and sell a NIV which is a very useful tool to do this. Makes it a lot easier on the company that has to estimate before a self-leveling pour. Other companies just use a simple laser level and the pins and are able to get close enough. For consistency's sake, though, a NIV is certainly going to be a top-notch tool before doing a self-leveling pour and allow you to set your heights accordingly. Just take a quick time out to go over how that's going to work. Here's a great video that we have up on YouTube, which is available to view anytime you may need it in the future. Okay, now you can see how we have our floor surveyed, prepped, pinned, primed, ready to pour. All right, now let's get into some of the technique. We're going to see this a lot more when we do the hands-on portion, but I just want to touch over it here so you know what we're looking at when we actually do the hands-on. Self-leveling is not magic. All right, I point that out because in the name it's called self-leveling. All right, so you will get people under that preconceived notion that somehow this is going to do some amazing stuff when they pour it out. We will get calls from time to time. Oh, your self-leveling is not working. Well, what's going on? Well, I poured it out and it's not self-leveling. Well, you got to keep in mind it mimics the flow characteristics of fluid. Okay, so although it is wet, it still needs to be placed and smooth. It's not something that you're going to be able to pour in the middle of the floor and it's automatically going to know how to go to the right place. You still have to move the material around. There is a technique to placing it to make sure that it does what it's supposed to do. So it is self-leveling, but with the proper assistance, placement, tooling, craftsmanship. Always important to note, failing to plan is planning to fail. So before you pour, always make sure that the temperature is still correct. All the conditions that you needed before are still correct. You have your time allotted right, so you have the proper crews, staging, mix stations, you name it, all set to go. You're not pouring over wet primer. You have all your isolation strips up. Everything you need to worry about. Just make sure you do it one more time before you actually get into the pour. Because once you get moving, you got to keep moving, which you'll see in a little bit. What are some of those tools going to look like? Gauge rake is going to be a key tool in any self-leveling pour. Again, which you'll see a lot more in the hands-on portion of the demo. Smoother and spreader, what I consider to be next to a shop blaster, the most important tool in any self-leveling pour. Spiked or spine rollers, with many people are comfortable with and prefer. And then cleats and spikes is a big one, so you're not walking into that wet material. Again, you got to get this stuff down and keep it wet as you pour. You're probably going to have to walk into wet material. So cleats or spikes is going to help you get back into the wet material, not ruin your clothes or shoes, but more importantly, not ruin that pour. It's going to allow you to walk through it and then walk back out and heal around those spike marks, where you can imagine if you had muck boots on or something like that, it would make it a lot harder for that product to heal back over your footprints. Good news is you can buy all of these items in an actual barrel big enough to do a 2-bag mix in our NXT toolkit, which is for sale. And we'll certainly show you that in the hands-on portion of the demo. The next video I'm going to show you is a great snapshot of what a self-leveling pour is going to look like when you have a pump truck or a hose outside. All right, you can see here this is not a one-person job. Again, you're going to have this job planned and ready to go before you get pouring and get that wet material coming out of the hose or start mixing that wet material. You can see here they have one guy actually moving the material around out of the hose, and all the way to the left there's someone actually working the gauge rake and the smoother. So these guys are going to move back, get the material out, and then that smoother is actually going to place the material, make sure it's hitting all the predetermined pins, and they're going to keep that job moving. You also see that piece of plywood set up to the edge. That's going to be a pour stop. On this job, they decided they want to get it done in sections, so they're going to move that stop over and just keep going with the job as they move along. And here's what it looked like as that crew progressed. They were able to pour that area in one day. So you can see here on the left, the natural progression to the middle as they worked their way across the floor, again, keeping it in wet material. That material dried overnight. They were installing finished floor goods the next day. So you can imagine how much time and money that's going to save versus the older method of having to hand pack that floor flat. Not only are you saving time and money for your crews, but for the job in whole, which only makes the owner happier and more interested in getting this type of innovative technology on a job to keep their buildings moving faster. So as you can see, this not only saves time and money for your crew, but it certainly is a story to tell the building owner because they're able to open sooner, which in hand means sooner revenue. Let's just touch over the main ways that you're going to mix these products. The most common way is going to be barrel mixing. For smaller type jobs where you're doing a couple rooms here and there, barrel mix is going to be the way to go. Doing 2 bags at a time in this barrel. But again, it requires proper planning. You're going to want to keep this material into a wet edge, meaning that you're going to want to pour wet material into wet material. It's not something you want to let dry and then come back and do. If you have to, there is ways to do that, which we'll touch on. But It's not like it's something where you could have one guy pour 2 bags in, mix it up, bring it over by himself. These are what, 50, 60-pound bags, depending on the product they're using. So that's a lot of weight, a lot of time, a lot of downtime for that previous pour to start drying and setting up. And then he's got to pour it on the floor without making a huge mess, and then have to smooth it and spread it and all the things that go along with placing the material. It is not a one-person job. Just keep that in mind. Proper planning, proper crews, proper staging. Keep these barrels next to a nice source of water. Get all these things planned out before you start the pour so it doesn't become prohibitive when you actually start the project. Pumping is ideal for large jobs. Very common piece of equipment for companies to get into these larger scale self-leveling pours. It allows the material in the water to remain in one location, usually ideally outside of the building, pumped in through a window, which is going to keep dust down on the inside of the building, which is always a bonus nowadays. So again, if you really start getting into the self-leveling scope of work, this is a great tool to get to improve your bottom line, productivity, manpower, you name it. You could see here before with the barrel mix, that's usually going to be a 2-person operation because you figure you want one guy mixing, one guy pouring material, and then 2 guys to carry those 100+ pound barrels. This is going to allow a guy to stand over here. Usually there's going to have little spikes or something on top to help break the bags, get the powder in with the predetermined mix of water that's already going in there, and just keep that mix going. So it turns a 2-man job that's less productive into a 1-man job that's highly productive. And then pumping with a mobile mixing station. These are for those mammoth jobs. Large companies do own these. We do also offer this in the Ready Mix program though, which is great for a smaller contractor. It allows them to do large-scale jobs without having to worry of the overhead of buying the truck. You essentially rent the truck and the mixed product from us. You're going to have your crews inside ready to handle the hose, move that around, and get the material out of the hose, and then also obviously place and smooth the material as it's going down. But as you can see here, the main thing, no matter which method you use with self-leveling, the self-leveling is going to increase productivity, increase efficiency on the job, and ideally it's going to increase profits for everyone involved, from the installation side all the way to the end user of the building. Real quick before we go any further, I just want to point out the importance of FF versus a level floor, essentially talking about expectations versus reality. Just want you to know how to talk the talk, know what we're talking about here. If an architect or an engineer or someone like that throws this on you, you see in the little picture on the top left, the wavy line, that actually is considered a level floor but not flat. And then below that, that's a flat floor but not level. So when getting into FF, you're going to see that essentially on any flooring manufacturer's installation instructions, what FF they want. This kind of touches on the great divide between the Division 3 and Division 9. FF of 25 may be met at the time of the pour, but it may not be a 1/4 and 10 when it comes time for that floor covering to go down. So it's important to note before you put a finished flooring down, what that level and 10 is going to be. So for example, if there's an 1/8 and 10, essentially what that's telling you is that there can't be a variation of more than an 1/8 of an inch within a 10-foot span. So again, I'm not going to get into the engineering side of it too much. This really isn't up to the flooring installer. You're being told it's directed by the floor finish that's going down, what their instructions say. So just keep in mind, if you show up to a job and that flooring says that that floor has to be an 1/8 and 10 and you put a 10-foot straight edge down and it doesn't meet that requirement, you can then go back to the super owner and tell them, hey, look, we have to do some leveling. The floor doesn't meet the proper flatness or level for the material being installed, and it's got to be fixed. And as always, address these things sooner than later. Don't wait till the day before or the day of that you go to install flooring to check these things out and surprise everyone with the fact that you're going to have to clear out the rooms, to shop blast, prime, self-level these rooms. Get it done well before you're going to show up so there's no surprises on the job, which is in hand going to give you the best chance of actually getting paid to do this work. Okay, so I know that was a crash course in self-leveling. I could certainly spend a whole day going over this stuff, the history of it, the science behind it, but the main thing is to make sure that you plan the job right. You have the proper prep done, you have the proper planning done, you have the proper crews, you know what the finished flooring that you're installing requirements are, and you meet all of those things before you actually start the pour. If you do these things, you wouldn't believe. I know this stuff looks scary when you first look at it. You see liquid coming out of a hose, and how's that going to work? It's all going to make a lot more sense when we get onto the hands-on portion of the demo. Okay? So again, I know it's a crash course. Don't get nervous. It's not as scary as it looks. I just wanted to go over the main things that you have to worry about. And again, it's all going to come together nicely when you actually do the hands-on portion. You're going to see how this stuff moves. I just want to touch on these things to make you know that the pre-planning on self-leveling is extremely important, and it's going to make the actual pour super easy if you do it all up front. So now let's get into the products that you're going to use. First one I want to touch on is our NXT Level. This is our baseline, our base level self-leveling underlayment. One thing worth pointing out here is that this is a great product in the industry because it allows you to go up to 3 inches thick in one lift. That is a big advantage. There's not many or any that I know of actually in the industry that can go up to 3 inches thick in one pour. So again, big time saver. Always read the product and the max depth that it can go to. See what that is and know what that is, because if you go to that max depth, it is going to be adversely affected when it dries. it's going to create problems, whether it's cracking or delaminating, you name it. So know the thickness it can go to, stay to that level, and if you're going to go over it, you're going to have to actually stop that pour. So say if it was with this product at 3 inches, you're going to have to stop that pour at 3 inches, reprime, and then level again up to the height that you have to go to until you get your desired level. So with the NXT level, for example, you're usually going to be walkable on this in about 3 to 4 hours. Again, depending on site conditions, the thickness, all that stuff. But usually in about 3 to 4 hours, you could walk on this product. The reason I point this out is once that floor is hard enough to walk on, it's hard enough for you to be able to install tile over it. And then in regards to like resilient sheet goods, tiles, stuff like that, carpets, you're usually going to be able to put finished floor goods outside of, tile, non-moisture sensitive stones, stuff like that in about 24 hours. Our premium self-leveling underlayment is going to be our NXT Level Plus. As I mentioned before, you can see here this product can go from 1/8 of an inch to 1.25 inches in a single lift, typically walkable in about 1 to 4 hours. And I mentioned that again because once it's walkable, it's ready for tile or non-moisture sensitive stone. And it's not unheard of under proper conditions to be able to install finished floor goods like resilient sheet goods, like I mentioned, VCT, you name it, in about 12 hours after this product is poured. So you can imagine where these self-levers are going to save you a ton of time. You see here before, you probably would have had to hand pack that whole floor, float the whole thing out, get it flat. This is going to allow you to pour this material, and if you're installing tile, start installing potentially as soon as an hour after it's poured. Where a mortar bed, for example, is typically going to take about 72 hours to dry out. I just want to touch on some of the physical properties, just point out why the NXT Level Plus is going to be the premium product. Again, both great products. So you can see here the NXT Level Plus is going to give you a higher compressive strength. It's going to have higher tensile strength, flexural, all those properties. The main thing being obviously the dry time, so return to service is a big one. If you got a job where you got to get back on it, say same day or first thing the next morning, certainly it's going to be NXT Level Plus, since the NXT Level is going to take a little longer to dry out. And you can also see here the NXT Level Plus is going to perform better when you do the apples to apples industry standard tests. Another document worth pointing out is going to be our TDS 235N, which is going to be our NXT flow test method. Again, take the time to go over this before you do any pour. You need to know what you're doing before you get into it. This is not a product that I suggest, taking the bag and winging it. Definitely get into these documents that I'm mentioning, learn what you're doing, play around with the material first. Again, it's easy to do, but if you don't do the proper planning and the proper steps up front, it could come back to haunt you big time in the back end. It's essentially a test that's going to show you that the product is homogeneous and free from separation. Making sure you have the ideal flow range for the product is going to go a long way to making sure that this pour goes smoothly, is easy to place, and also cures correctly. And most of you are probably aware, or have at least heard of, self-levelings aren't always underlayments anymore. Technology's evolved with the influx, and for good reason, of the green initiatives, LEED buildings, lean construction principles. Sustainable spaces is a big thing as well. So now this technology has evolved into self-leveling toppings, which are essentially products that are poured like a self-leveler, but then can be left as the wear surface or a polishable topping to be used as the finished floor. So it doesn't have to get a floor covering. You can see here the two main products in this category are going to be our NXT Level SP, which stands for salt and pepper, which gives you that look as you can see in the picture below the bag. Really cool aesthetic on a job site. And then our NXT Level DL, again, which is that more matte grayish, can be tinted for sure. But again, it's just going to be a straight gray where you can see the SP has some character to it already in the bag. And then I mentioned polishable toppings. These products can be polished with the proper equipment. That's a whole different presentation and education that you're going to want to get. But just keep in mind that we do have a document for that as well, which would be our TDS 238. And that's going to be our guide for polishing NXT self-leveling overlayments. So again, there's self-leveling underlayments, and then what we're talking about here is self-leveling overlayments or toppings. We did go over this in the moisture mitigation portion of the presentation, in which you will have seen the hands-on actually of this sand broadcast and getting it off, but I just want to touch on it again. This is a must when installing any SLU wear topping or layer. The reason being, as again you can see to the picture on the right, it's going to prevent that map cracking or greatly reduce it. If you don't do this step, these map cracks are going to appear, and 99% of the time the owner is not going to be happy with the appearance. It's just the nature of the product and how it dries. So again, anytime you're leaving these products as a topping, certainly make sure you take the time and do the sand broadcast properly. Which again, it's to the point of refusal typically into an epoxy layer, which is going to act as your primer at that point. And always suggested anytime you do one of these self-leveling toppings, certainly do a mock-up before you commit to the whole space. Whether it's an in-service mock-up that you plan on using as part of the pour later on, make sure that the owner or the end user sees the product in place so they have a realistic idea what they're looking for. On these types of installs, always keep their expectations in line with reality. Don't show them a little piece of the product dried. It's going to look perfect and uniform. These products still come out liquid, so as you place them, they're going to have some swirls in them. If you do polish them, the edges are probably going to look a little different than the field. So take the time to do a mock-up. Make sure they approve to the look and like it before you continue on the rest of the job. Put down all the material that you probably already paid for without getting paid for in the back end, so you eliminate any of those back and forth problems at the end. Mock-up, 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 anytime you're doing an overlay. And just to reiterate, make sure you know what you're broadcasting the sand into based on the moisture test or whatever you determine that you need to use below it. If there's no moisture in play, you could certainly get away with just using the NXT epoxy primer. And as we touched on in the moisture mitigation presentation, if there is moisture present, that's going to be higher than the finished flooring that you're installing or the product you're installing. You're going to have to use a moisture mitigation product, whether it be our Vapor Band Primer ER or NXT Vapor Reduction Coating. Just keeping in mind that you're going to need to use one of these as the base layer if you do broadcast sand, and or if you do have moisture involved. And again, we touched on this in the moisture mitigation presentation. When it comes to joints and cracks, also don't forget about the TDS 230N. This is going to clearly explain in writing how you're going to want to address expansion joints, control joints, movement joints, you name it, in the cracks before you put the mitigation layer down or your sand broadcast layer. And then also worth mentioning, don't hesitate to look at our TDS 166. Also important to know about in regards to dew point. Again, I'm not going to get into the science of it here, just to save you some time. Read the document for sure, but the idea is you can imagine dew point being, the water on the grass, for example, when you come outside in the morning. You do not want that same effect on the top of the slab before you put your primary self-leveler down. You could imagine the problems that that's going to create. So just be aware of the dew point, what to look for. It's a very, very simple thing to look out for. I just want to make you aware of it so it doesn't become a problem on your job as an oversight type of thing. Okay, some other substrates that you can go over as well. You can certainly pour over plywood. Plywood subfloor, we're going to want that to be still exterior glue plywood, not OSB or anything like that. When pouring over plywood, though, you're going to certainly want to make sure that you use the lath. You're always going to want that to be a galvanized diamond lath, which means it won't rust if the moisture, say from the water or even time in the building, gets on it. So galvanized diamond metal lath, very important. Some people do, if they're confident in the deflection of the floor or the structure of the building they're going over, they will use Stratamat or Strat Heat Mat if you're using a heat system here. Can be used in lieu of lath, but I always prefer the industry preferred and known standard to be the lath over the exterior glue plywood. When doing the lath, you're going to prime that plywood substrate first, per that TDS 230N like I mentioned earlier. And again, make sure it's galvanized to prevent that rust or anything like that from decaying at that lath over time. And I just want to point out here, I'm talking about a plywood subfloor, okay? I'm not talking about a traditional wood flooring that's over there, and then you just put lath over it and let it go. Say a 2 1/4 inch finished wood floor like you would have in a house. That is not acceptable. That's going to have to go. That's going to expand and contract too much. We're talking about an actual plywood subfloor here. Sometimes people say, oh, can we install your product over wood? They get the quick answer, yes, and then a week later they come back with, so you said you can install it over wood. We're talking about plywood here, not an actual wood flooring. We also do say that you could pour over existing flooring with this product. A couple ways to do that, all in the TDS 230N. You can see here you're going to be able to do a 1-to-1 mix, 1 part NXT primer to 1 part water with the slurry. The slurry is actually going to be the product that you're using. So if you're using NXT Level Plus, you would sprinkle that out and you're going to make it into a slurry almost like a paste. Some people have gotten comfortable and have had success also using our Prime and Bond as a primer over an existing substrate, say an existing tile floor or VCT floor that's well bonded. This product essentially goes on like paint, and it has a sand aggregate in it that's going to make it gritty, almost mimicking the CSP of 3. Just keep in mind when going over any existing flooring, you're only as good as what you go over. Right, so if that floor is not well bonded to what's below it, the same thing's going to happen to your self-leveling, and it's almost certainly going to try to pull that off the floor, or it's going to pull itself off of the finished floor. Again, not something you want when putting a self-leveling over it. So now I'm sure some of you during this presentation have been asking the question, all right, well, what if I don't need to pour an entire floor? How do I patch a floor? I just want to touch on some of the other products in the NXT line. Again, this line, the NXT offerings are going to be floor prep type products, right? So whether it's skim coat, moisture mitigation, self-leveling, it's going to be products to get that floor ready and provide a proper substrate to apply a finished flooring over. So what do you do when you don't need to go as far as pouring an entire floor? I just want to go over those products real quick. It's going to be our patch and skim products, all right? When do you patch or skim? Very common to do when the substrate has relatively few issues. Also commonly used when ramping to marry 2 heights to create accessibility. Say if you're at a door jam or something like that and there's a height difference, you could certainly use patch and skim products to fix this a lot of times and ramp up. A lot of times you'll just have it on the job site to fix substrate issues while working. So the whole floor might be in pretty good shape, for example, but you're going to want to patch and skim it, maybe to fill in joints between plywood or screw holes or something like that to keep the job moving and that finished flooring on top looking smooth. The long story short is patch and skim is going to be your very fast flash patch, just trying to put a nice smooth layer over something to get that floor ready for finished flooring. Again, something where you don't need to go the full extent of pouring an entire floor. So you can see here in this picture, some minor divots or some ramping. These are where these hand patch type products are going to be used. What are the products? Our NXT patch is going to be for the thicker patches. A lot of times that'll be used at a door jamb, for example. You can go up to 1.5 inches with this product. Or our NXT skim You can apply from a skin depth, which is basically as tight as you can pull it with a straight edge, up to 1 inch. Both rapid setting formulas. You can see here an NXT Skim in the proper conditions can keep you ready for floor covering in as soon as 20 minutes. And the patch, it's often not uncommon to be ready for flooring in about 40 minutes. So again, minor fixes, something that labor-wise isn't going to hurt you to hand trowel. Maybe it's a one-man job, and you know you just need to smooth it out a little bit. These are the products you're going to want to go to. I just want to touch on the pump truck and the Ready Mix program. I did go over it briefly before. What this is going to be, again, is a mobile mixing station that's going to pull up to the job site. You would set this up, obviously, with your local rep. But what you're going to have to worry about is having people inside to operate the hose. So basically hold the hose and move the material around as it's coming out of their wet, and then placing the material. Other than that, it's all going to be mixed outside, basically delivered into the building and ready for you to use. So again, you don't have to be some mega contractor to get on these bigger jobs. It's just a great resource. If you see a need for it and you think that you or the owner could benefit from it, it's certainly something to know about and keep in mind for the right job. So long story short, what is the end result of a self-leveling underlayment? You're going to see here, it's going to give you a nice flat floor that meets the finished floor covering manufacturer's installation instructions, allowing you to install beautiful floors in large spaces much faster than ever before. So here's a great example. You can see all the mixed media they have in this project. This floor was poured in one day, and they were able to come back and start paying attention to the extreme detail that a floor like this needs the next day. Just keeping that job moving a lot faster. Here's a good example of an overlayment, like I was telling you, self-leveling overlayment or topping, wear surface. You can see here, this one was topically dyed. You can integrally pigment these, so you're going to have color all the way through the body of the product. So I just want to show you the very diverse looks that you can get with a product like an overlayment. Again, a great, quick resource to give very beautiful designs in the right type of space. And the moral of the story here, though, is that you're going to get visible and measurable results. So again, proper planning and prep is going to be able to save you and your clients a ton of time and money on any project that you use self-leveling on, whether it's an underlayment or an overlayment. And just to summarize, I know I've said it a bunch of times, it's probably redundant to this point in the presentation, the surface prep is everything in regards to a successful application. If you don't have the proper prep done, you're just making it a lot harder on yourself to hope that product still performs well because you didn't do your work in the front end. Goes without saying that all flooring types need surface prep, so again, just make sure you do all the planning up front. You're going to have a beautiful, successful install on the back end that you and your client's going to be happy with. When everyone's happy, everyone gets paid, which leads to more callbacks and jobs and all the benefits that come with that. So again, planning. Failing to plan is planning to fail. And you get the picture here. We want you to work smarter, not harder, and this is a great innovation for that type of project. Okay, and that's going to conclude the PowerPoint portion of our self-leveling presentation. Now let's get into the hands-on.
All right, Marcel, thank you so very much. That was a ton of information. Fantastic presentation. Are there any questions that you'd like to share with the group that you'd like to focus on, or any points you'd like to emphasize while I get the other video prepped up?
Again, you know, the main one, obviously I've talked about it at length already, is the prep and the planning is the big one. Take the time to get on the job. Even if you thought you had the prep and planning set up before, I usually, before I do a self-leveling job, like to go the day before even. Make sure that stuff is out of your way. You don't have to worry about showing up and moving, you know, who knows, drywall pallets out of a room or something like that. The more space you could get at once, obviously the more effective it's going to be. So just always give yourself that chance. You know, always be looking for more space in a building. And then that's it, really. Like I said, failing to plan is planning to fail.
Awesome. Any questions that you feel is important to bring up to the group?
Nothing too big. You know, we did get the weight one. Dean replied, we got 5 pounds per square foot at like a 1/2 inch thick was one of the questions that came up. Mixing ratio, that's always going to be, you know, dependent on the product. So always read those labels. Like I mentioned, the TDS 230N too. Anything you don't see here, go to that document. It is literally, like I said, a Bible. I mean, it's going to tell you everything you should believe in, everything you need to do, follow those steps, and it's going to be fine for you.
And again, that is available on our website at www.laticrete.com. Tons of great resources on our website.
You got it.
All right, so I'm going to queue up our next video, which is the product demonstration video. So I will start sharing my screen with you all and get it going.
All right.
Oh, there we go.
Okay, so I just want to go over what you're going to get in our LATICRETE self-leveling toolkit real quick. These are available for purchase. They're going to have basically the 101 stuff you're going to need to get started on a self-leveling pour. So let's see what we have inside. Okay, definitely an essential tool when doing this. Cleats, all right? These are very easy to slide on. So you put your foot on the ground. I usually put it on a little bit, then kick the rest of the way, and you're good to go. I do recommend, though, if you're doing a moisture mitigation layer like we did, a lot of times guys are going to wear softball cleats, the rubber type cleats on the bottom. That way you're not pushing that point load through that membrane, which shouldn't be a problem, but again, you're just better safe than sorry. Next, you're going to get a smoother, essential tool, which you're going to see here when we actually pour the product. This drill, this is a perfect drill for this type of bucket. Like I mentioned in my presentation, you're usually going to have two people kind of manning the bucket, mixing the product and dumping it out on the floor, usually 2 bags at a time. This drill is contoured to hit the edges of the bucket and not leave any material left behind, which could dry up over time as you do more and more buckets as the job goes on. Essential tool. We have a gauge rake. Again, essential tool when placing this material. Like we said, just because it's called self-leveling doesn't mean it self-levels. You still got to move it around. This is a very effective tool. You're going to be able to set the height that you want, push the material around. That helps place it, which makes the smoothing portion of the install a lot easier. Some people in lieu of or in combination with the smoother are going to use a spike roller. Again, very effective tool. This also helps you place that material in a nice even coat. One of the things I do mention when you use this though, be careful that you don't get back on that floor if you poured it too late with the spike roller. If it is starting to cure and you pull away, sometimes you will see the actual little putt marks. It almost looks like the side of a golf ball when you walk away. Just be warned of that. As you can see here, we have a pole that comes with the kit for all the tools that I already went over. You're also going to get a roller screen for that spike roller and the tools that go along with it, and a trusty little measuring bucket. Again, make sure you have the right water ratio for the product that you're installing. And then last but not least, the most important tool of all, nice, durable, sturdy, LATICRETE branded, self-leveling mixing bucket. Again, 2 bags at a time, no problem this thing. You're going to keep that job moving real smooth. Now we're going to get into mixing the product. Today I'm going to show you the NXT Level Plus, which again can go right over the Vapor Band Primer ER without priming. Huge advantage in the industry. So, just a couple of things worth pointing out here before we get going. We already have our water pre-measured in the bucket. With this product, you're looking at about 5 to 5.5 quarts per bag. Again, when you're using this barrel, we're going to do a 2-bag mix. Just makes it go a lot smoother, a lot faster. Other things you can see here, we also have our water pre-measured in the buckets. So we're going to have a 2-bag mix so we can just keep that job moving. Worth pointing out, this is not a 1 or a 2-man job. As you can see here, you're going to have crews to keep this stuff going. You're going to want to pour in the wet material, so the more you can stage your job up front, the better it's going to go when you're actually pouring. One more important thing to point out, just keep a margin trowel handy, something like that. You are going to want to, as you mix, scrape this stuff out of the pail. You don't want to let it start drying in the pail. A lot of times on a big job, people will get halfway through, they keep using the same pail over and over. What they don't realize is they're introducing material that's already curing into their mix. So as you go along on that job, it's going to start performing worse and worse as you go. Again, not a problem with the product. You just have to make sure you keep clean water, clean pails moving as you go along. All right, so we're going to get into the mixing. Again, 2-bag mix. We already have the water in the bale. You can see here, Gilles getting the extra material off the side. 2 to 3 minutes you're going to want to mix this material. Very important to keep that mix going for the 2 to 3 minutes. Whatever product you're using, read the label, follow the amount of time they want you to mix it. If it says 2-3 minutes, make sure you do the full time. You want to allow those polymers to blend and do what they're going to do to make the product perform like it should. Thank you. So we have the material all mixed up. You're going to see here in a minute why this is going to be a job for a crew. Ideally, you're going to have 2 people on the mixing. You're going to see here that we're going to drop the barrel onto the floor. If you have a crew going, you're going to have someone on the gauge rake helping to place that material, and someone following along with the smoother. You're going to be able to do a lot of footage in a little amount of time. All right, so we're going to get material out on the floor. Here. So it's pretty easy to see why a crew would be helpful in something like this. You want to keep that in wet material, so the more people you have in the job, the faster this is going to go. All right. So first tool we're going to look at, our gauge rake. Again, this is going to help initially place that material. We have it set to a height that's going to work for the level that we need. So we're just going to start moving the material around. You can see here I got my cleats on. So I'm able to step in wet material. So you can see here how much this is helping condense the material, giving us a pretty accurate height. All right, now our smoother. Again, ideally you're going to have one person doing each task, but you're going to see here, you just want to break this surface tension when you go across. You don't want to push down too hard and pull the material with you. You're just trying to break that surface tension, which helps get the air bubbles out of the material, helps it heal cleaner, and again, it's going to be easier to move around. So you can see here, I'm just lightly pushing the fins into the material, come back around. Again, light pressure, just getting those fins in the material. Breaking that surface tension allows it to heal nice. Gets rid of some of those air bubbles. All right, so you can see here, I actually went back over with the spike roller. You can see how that helped break up the material and allow it to heal a little better. Again, the main thing here, just don't wait too long so that starts to heal or cure. But as long as you get on it soon enough, this is also a great tool to make the pour heal nice on the floor. So here you can see this is a good example of how the gauge rake is going to help. We got a lot of material on this side. You see here, this is going to be a great example of how this tool is going to help you the next day on the job. So now we're able to take that material, get it back over to where it's needed, and we know we have a pretty good thickness for this pour. Again, you can see the benefit of having the cleats on. I'm able to get into the material. I'm not ruining the pour. I'm not penetrating the moisture mitigation below it. You keep the job moving. And at this point, all you'd have to come do to clean this up, come back in with the smoother, smooth it out. So you can see here, it flows nice like liquid, but again, you still have to place it, get it into where you want it to be. Beauty. Again, one more time, just for posterity, you can see here there is some appearance of waviness in the floor. So you're going to want to use the spike roller when you roll the material out. Again, it's going to help it heal. If this is a decorative floor especially, it's going to get some of these ridge lines out that you can see in the material. So here will be a good example. When you hit it, you don't have to be neat. You can see the material is going to heal on its own. So you can see it's getting rid of those ribbon lines in the middle. Not a big deal if you're covering it with tile or finished floor covering. But again, this is going to help that heal nice and clean.
All right. Marcel, look at you. You change so fast. You're so quick with your change of clothing. It's amazing. All right. So is there any other questions that you'd like to bring up or focus on?
Not really. Let me just see here. So adding pea gravel, we did send that document over. If you copy and paste the link we sent, you should be able to get it up on the internet. It didn't auto make that a link, I guess, when it turns it blue. But again, you could always find it on our website as well. So technical data sheets, 230, what is that one? 232N, I believe it is. Yep, 232N. And you are good to go. And we just got one in for what is the price for the kit. I do not know. We are not inclined to pricing in our in our position, but certainly we'll get you in touch with the local rep, and then you could obviously get that pricing from there.
Yeah, we also had a question from Julio Ibarra, who was basically asking to see what the fee was to rent the truck for the for that program you spoke about.
Gotcha.
Julio will get you in touch with a proper person with your local sales rep, and they will be able to help you with all the pricing. Also have a question from Jason Goldberg. Yes, this webinar and the moisture mitigation webinar will actually also be available on LATICRETE University. So we have to work some things out and we'll upload it on there, but it will be available to watch anytime. But if you need to, I will also share the links to the videos of the webinars. So all that information will be available 24/7.
Yep. Yeah, and then Sid, to your reply, we have your contact info there. We will get you the proper rep and everything for your territory, certainly. And I will reach out to you after this. Yep.
Sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, guys. So again, thank you so much for your time. Not to cut you off there, Jill, but prep, planning, and other than that, read the instructions, and there's really no science to it. To give you a nice flat, a floor that makes your customers very, very happy real fast. A lot easier than hand patching and stuff like that. So.
Sure. And I get that the speed of how things cure can be a little scary at first, but once you get familiar with the tools and kind of the flow of the thing, it really becomes second nature. Installing these floors is not difficult. It's not rocket science at all.
Right. If I could do it, anyone could do it. So.
All right. Well, I'm going to close this out a few minutes early. Marcel, again, thank you so much for your time and all your efforts and the fantastic presentation. I always learn a lot from watching your content, so thank you very much. Everybody, thank you so very much for taking the time out of your busy lives to join us on this webinar. I hope you found our content educational and helpful. If there are questions that you guys are maybe not thought about or hesitate to ask, please do not hesitate to reach our technical services department. We are available via phone calls, chats, or email. If you go to our website again at www.laticrete.com, you can find all of our contact info, and you will have a little chat window actually that pops up at you. So at any time, please do not hesitate to contact us. Again, I want to thank all of you for coming here, and I wish you all a great day. I hope to see you on our next webinar. Have a great afternoon, everybody. Take care.
Thank you all. Take care.